Welcome, everyone, to the L7C podcast. Today, we have a very special episode for you guys today. On the day that we are recording, it is the beginning of Women's History Month. Last year, we didn't get the chance to do this, so this year we are going to do that. We're going to have a little forum of some of our women who contribute to the L7C podcast and just talk about stuff about Women's History Month. Don't know exactly where we're going to go, but I'm sure it's going to be informative and great to listen for you guys. So first, we have the My Hero enthusiast, Miss Andrea Alanese. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I just had a mini heart attack because I thought my speakers weren't working when you started recording the session. So that was a little bit of a freak out, but I'm excited to do this podcast and talk with, I think this is my first time talking to Carly since the Put in Bay trip almost a full year ago. So hi, Carly.
We also have Dr. Cassandra Lowry. How are you today?
I am living the dream, Martin.
Oh, and since it is your first episode, Cassie and Carly, even though this is 2 months removed, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too, Martin.
I mean, I've just said it to everyone's first episodes of the years, and it's
That's
you
hilarious.
Carly's first episodes of the years, so I just wanted to say that out.
I appreciate that.
And then, Carly, are you with us? Is your mic still muted? Carly is having technical difficulties. Let me try something. Has to unmute. Okay, while Carly is figuring out the mic stuff, we are going to talk about Women's History Month, some topics going on in 2023. Carly, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
There you go. Yep, we can hear you now. Oh, I hope.
Yes, we got you.
Amazing. Sorry, I guess my laptop was muted.
Happens to the best of us.
It is okay. It is perfectly fine. So I guess Women's History Month, it started, I think, I was looking at it in the 1900s when it was started, which is crazy. But this is really an open forum pod. We don't really have a set script. So I guess where do we want to start? Or what does anyone want to specifically start on topic-wise? I guess we could just, you guys know better than me. What is it like in 2023 being a woman?
Well, that is a very broad question. I guess what comes to mind for me immediately when someone says, like, what's it like to be a woman in today's society? Obviously, I wasn't around way back in the day, but I think just the thing that hits me the most is the availability of options. I keep seeing the fact online about women not having been allowed to open their own bank accounts until I believe the 1970s or 1960s. That still blows my mind. So the availability of options, but at the same time, I feel like a lot of societal expectations are still exactly the same. There are more options, but the undercurrent of having those options of, being a working mom, you're still kind of shamed no matter which avenue you go in. Or if you choose not to be a mother as well, just the options are there, but that underlying belief that it should be the way that it was before, or you're not quite doing it right.
Carly, Cassie, anything you want to add to that?
I think it's so hard to answer this question because obviously, we live in a more privileged time than we used to, especially as women, and comparatively, clearly we're not where we want to be in some aspects, and other aspects I think that there's a lot of kind of like that weird double-edged sword where you're trying to like balance like being feminine and still like being a desirable partner and things like that. But like also, I mean, lots of women talk about like kind of like girl bossing too close to the sun. And it's so hard sometimes to balance like what does it mean to be this like strong independent woman, but also like somebody who's still desirable to other people, especially if like you want a family and things like that. That I don't know. I think it's really interesting for me because I have a lot of things that I've done. I have a lot of things that I still want to do. I'm actually in the process of opening my own business. So it's interesting because I've kind of like reached that point in my life where I'm starting to recognize, oh, if I wasn't a woman, maybe like I would be about 3 to 4 times like further ahead. And I've listened to probably like 2 or 3 books about how to negotiate as a woman, because there are certain things that women do that are great, but there are certain things that you get encouraged to do as a man that doesn't work as a woman. It actually comes off as like quite problematic. So, I mean, if anybody wants to read a good book about like negotiation and how to get like further in your job, there's a book called Machiavelli for Women that's been really interesting. And then there's also The Financial Feminist. And yeah, I think that those are kind of like my big pieces, is that the older I get, the more feminist I get, and probably the more like grouchy I get about the fact that we're not further ahead.
Carly.
Well, congrats on starting a business. That's awesome. But I would totally agree with both of them. I am a mom, going to be a mom again, which is awesome. And it is not easy. There's a lot of expectations put on women, as mentioned. But yeah, I'm trying to finish school, getting all this stuff done. Honestly, I feel like they nailed it. I don't really have anything else to say. I did have a fact, which was kind of crazy. According to a government website, it says women own less than 20% of the world's land, which is kind of crazy. And then another one says they own only 1%. I'm not sure which is true. That's from the Library of Congress, though. So women should definitely be further.
That's a crazy fact, Carly. And congratulations again on your little one on the way. And congratulations, Kassie, as well, for starting your own business. You guys are girl bossing it up. If you like that term, I know there's a little bit of contention around that term, but either way, y'all are crushing it. That fact is wild, but at the same time, like historically, it makes sense because, like, my family on my mom's side, they were dairy farmers. So my grandfather is the one that inherited the farm, but he had, I believe, 3 or 4 sisters, and he was the youngest. But because he was the boy, he got the farm. It was expected he was getting the farm. His sisters, I don't know if they felt pressured to be married off, but it was understood that even getting married, the farm was not going to be tied to them and their family and their kids. So just generationally, it's not that far off because, like I said, it's my grandfather, so it's my mom's dad. And originally, historically, owning land is how families built wealth. So it kind of also, in my head, ring off the alarm bells about how, like, women own, I believe you said 20%, Carly, of the world's land?
It's less than 20%.
Less than 20%. So it also kind of contributes to that whole level of wealth disparity, and not directly correlates to wage gap, but definitely wealth disparity.
There was a lot of, there is Chelsea. Chelsea, can you hear me?
There she goes.
Oh, and she left. Tragic.
You ran her off, Martin.
No, I didn't. But she was there. She was stressing out about. Oh, there we're back. Chelsea.
This was so stupid.
That's a great way to enter. Fantastic. But
Sorry. Hi.
Jesus. For those listening, the pop culture expert of the L7C, Chelsea Hepburn, has just entered in. Before I go to the next thing, Chelsea, just your thoughts on, I guess it's a broad question, being a woman in 2023.
Oh, I'm flustered. I don't know what everyone else has said, so not that like you have to go with the group because you don't. But I don't. What are the vibes?
What? Answer the question.
Well, the vibes have been, I'll give you the clue. The vibes have been kind of touching on the double-edged sword, kind of the feelings of, I feel discouraged that we're not further. And then mentioning, how difficult it is to just be a modern woman, to juggle everything, starting a business, Carly being a mom, and then expecting another one on the way, and all of the stuff.
Fair. Because the first thing that popped into my head was frustrating for numerous reasons. Like healthcare is insane, trying to advocate for yourself in any shape, way, or form. And then just being told how to act or what you should feel. I've had a day, so those I think are the two things on my mind.
That's great answer. Fantastic.
Thanks.
So there was a lot of buzzwords that have been said. Kassie, you brought up feminist, which is a buzzword now in modern 2023. And I know I've had this conversation with Andrew almost like once every 2 weeks, and Chelsea a couple of times. So Kassie, since you brought up the word feminist, now in 2023, to me, this is my opinion, I feel like it's truly lost its true meaning, and now it's weaponized and politicized as now a bad thing. What are your thoughts on that?
So the word feminist, I mean, I think that the more that people dig into the literature about like what feminism means and like truly what the word is supposed to kind of like portray is very different than like what we portray it in like modern day society. A lot of people tend to think feminist and think man eater. They tend to think boss bitch. They tend to think like all of the like negative things, or like man hater. That tends to be a really like popular one as well. The thing is like when you actually like take a step back and you look at the actual like values of being a feminist, it is about like fighting for equality. Nobody's out here. Well, I'm sure that there are like people who call themselves feminists that are out here like being like, oh, like I want to like dominate like mankind. That's not the thing. Like we just want equal like opportunities. And it's really about like fighting not only for like women, but fighting for equality across all kind of like minorities and things. And I think that that's kind of one of those things that it stinks, because the word feminist has become, like you said, a buzzword, and a lot of people take it in this very negative context, which unfortunately like happens with lots of buzzwords, right? But I mean, from a stance of like being a true feminist, it's about really like drawing those values in to help like essentially fight the good fight. And like have us on equal ground. Like it's not that women think that they're better than men. It's more about like evening the playing or the field. It's kind of like there's also the aspect of like equality versus equity. We all talk about like equality, but the reality is like nobody wants equality. We want equity. Like that, those are two very different like aspects that I don't know that even as like somebody who tries to be pretty progressive, I understood until I was in graduate school. But it's essentially like getting people what they need, not like getting everybody the same thing. So that everybody is on that even playing ground, but it's not the fact that you all start out at the same place. It's that you start out the same start point, essentially. I know it's a little bit hard, and usually there's like visuals and stuff. It's a little easier to explain it. But if anybody ever like wants to see what equality versus equity it is, there's a pretty good cartoon that I actually really like, where it's these like three kids standing outside of like a baseball field. And one of them can like very clearly see over the gate. And like just kind of like talking about like if everybody's on the same level, but what equality is giving everybody the same size box so that they can see over the gate. Thing is like that doesn't get everybody over the gate in order to see. It's really like when we adjust the sizes of the boxes to accommodate the size of that person, that we then get to an equal stance. But the things that we've given those people aren't equal. It's that we got them all to the same point using different like amounts or sizes of boxes. Again, a lot easier to kind of like explain when you actually can see it. But if you like look up what equality versus equity is on the internet, usually it's one of like the first images that'll pop up.
Carly, do you have what are your thoughts on like the word feminist and now the whole meaning of it being completely like misconstrued in modern times?
I definitely agree. Do you go by Kassie, by the way? I just want to make sure.
I do go by Kassie. It just
Perfect.
Auto does whatever this is.
Jesus.
But yes, literally the definition of feminism is the advocacy of women's rights on the basis of the equality of the sexes. So she definitely mentioned that when you hear feminism, you think women like to tear down men, man eater, like she had mentioned, and I think that's totally true. I definitely think it's important for women to excel in all of their fields and what they're doing. But it's also important that men aren't being torn down as well. So I think she highlighted that very well. Yeah, I think feminism is important, and we shouldn't bring down other people.
Well said. Well said. Andrea and Chelsea, left you two for last, obviously, because I talked to you guys because you two are the two most social media-ish people that I know. So I know you guys see this stuff just as much as I do, but you guys see it from different angles, and I see the different videos from different angles. What are your guys' thoughts on the word feminist and how it's lost its meaning in 2023? Someone's got to go. Chelsea and Angie are both muted.
That's because technology hates me today for whatever reason. I struggle with like that feminism has lost its meaning a little bit, in the sense of I think we're kind of funneled the man like eater image and that portrayal of feminism and squashing down men, in the sense of that's what social media wants you to see. But when you get on certain sides of social media, it is all about the empowerment of not just women, but everyone. So I think it's important to kind of know the difference between mainstream social media. So like daily news on Snapchat. Yeah, it's super prevalent, and I send you many an article, but it's important to realize that in every single one of those articles, there's a typo, or they literally say one age of a person, and then 2 lines down, they say a different age for that same person. And it's important to realize that what is being pushed at us isn't necessarily the truth. Like, so that's where I struggle. But I think feminism is truly just about empowering women and anyone else for that matter. It is about equity and not necessarily equality.
Andrea.
So I would just echo what everybody else said. Just personal experience with the word. I, for a long time, would internally consider myself a feminist. However, I was very afraid to label myself as such because of, and the first time I think I heard the word feminazi was when I was in college. And they started using it, the people around me started using it for one particular college professor where I didn't have her specifically. So if this is true, I don't necessarily agree with it, but they would use the term for her because she was, she is a feminist, which is great. But she specifically would, from what I was told via rumor, is that she specifically would not allow the men in her classes to like get 100, whereas the women could. So like that, I was not on board with that. I don't know if that's 100% true, but that was the first kind of utterance I heard of the word. And it just made me, of course, then that followed the other, like, calling her the B word, all that other stuff, tearing her down on Rate My Professor. Oh my gosh, I'm sure her ratings were terrible. But so for a long time, I struggled with actually vocalizing it out loud and being willing to talk about it because I didn't want to be perceived as being a man hater, as frankly being a bitch, and so like I know some people kind of have those feelings longer. I had a roommate during my internship in DC, and it was so funny because like she's very expressive and opinionated and would express herself, and she would straight up lay out, oh, it's so annoying that all of my coworkers like tell me that I need to smile, that they tell me all of these things. But then we would kind of point out as like that, that ties into feminism. She's like, oh, I'm not a feminist. Like, I don't think that there's gender inequality, all that other stuff, but she's living it, speaking on it, annoyed by it, frustrated by it, but would kind of refuse to acknowledge that that was her lived experience and what was going on. And I think for potentially similar reasons that I avoided outright calling myself a feminist for a long time.
Very, very good points. Very good points. Chelsea, you brought up the point too about the social media thing, because it's true. If you type in feminist on YouTube right now, you'll get some of the top hits saying, from different people saying why you should never date anyone who labels herself a feminist. And that has like millions of views. And that's coming from men who have podcasts and speak on dating. And it's also coming from women who have podcasts and speak on dating, because apparently, Kassie, you brought another word, like feminist, you can't be like, if you're a feminist, you can't be quote unquote feminine. Like that's one of those things that people are pushing out, like Chelsea has said. And with the people who are young, well, Carly's like right on that teeter, like younger than her, who get super influenced by social media now. That's all they see now. So I know, Andrea, we've brought up too how if you go to the other side, Kassie, you brought up like dating, how the whole dating world now is completely changed by stuff like that. And now it's not, no one can date because now it's men versus women, which it shouldn't be. What are your thoughts on that first, Andrea?
Like you said, we've talked about it, and I hate it because it shouldn't be men versus women. Just like I think one of my favorite relationship advice sayings that I ever saw on social media was that it's never supposed to be you and your partner, like you versus your partner, kind of arguing. It's always supposed to be you and your partner versus the problem. And so I feel like if we could start viewing it this way on both sides, it would be a lot more manageable, and there would probably be a lot more communication and empathy from both camps. It's just, obviously it's not everybody's in either camp, but the extremes are what are pushed forward. It seems like more, there's more clickbait associated with it. It's highly emotional, so it's going to generate a reaction negative or positive. And so I think if there was more just empathetic communication, and I feel like in general, I think we as a society need to have like a come to the light moment about effective communication, active listening, and just kind of the phrase of putting yourself in somebody else's shoes has been around forever. But I think in practice, in my personal experience, I feel like the weight of that has primarily been put on women, in my personal experience and in my personal opinion. So it's, in my experience, it's been more the women having to be understanding of where the men are coming from. And it's not as often I've seen men fully trying to understand where the women are speaking from. And that's a little bit on privilege. That's a little bit on societal standards, expectations. Yeah. But I think that's my piece.
Awesome. Anyone else thoughts on like dating now, like the men versus women narrative and all that? Anyone could just hop in.
One of the things that actually like it popped into my mind because we were talking about Carly, and I apologize, Carly. I don't know that we've met. We might have, but I have a terrible memory. But I think one of the things that like comes to mind for me, especially at this point, is that there are a lot of expectations, and people are talking about it more, is that, yeah, you're allowed to like be like the girl boss, but you also need to come home and take care of the kids. And that like there's notoriously kind of this like, and I don't mean this like, because literally I'm never going to say that like this is a ubiquitous like constant among everybody, but women are allowed to have careers, but if you want a family, like the family is always supposed to come first and your career is always supposed to come second, and you're expected to always balance those things in like the broad terms. Now I'm not saying obviously like those are for everybody in every like relationship, because there are a lot of really great relationships where that's not the case and there's equal like balance between both partners. But that's kind of like those pieces that come across social media all the time is like, oh well, like it's great for like a dad to take his kids to the park. It's expected for a mom to take the kids to the park. It's like a big tearful moment when dad does something really cool. It's just kind of like expected when mom does something really cool. Like there's just this like inherent like piece where taking care of the kids, taking care of the family, like that is expected of a woman. And unfortunately we haven't quite completely reached that kind of like balance where, okay, like, yeah, I go out and I like go to work and I run a business or I do whatever I do. And then I come home and my partner helps me like take care of the things at home. There's still a lot where there's that truth remains to be that like, okay, mom just got home or wife just got home from a like 10-hour workday. Okay, well, she's supposed to go clean the dishes. She's supposed to load the laundry, things like that. And again, we're getting better about it, but we're not quite there yet. And I think that that's one of those things that we miss a lot. Also, I mean, like statistically, it's shown that people who like have doctorates, so women that have doctorates, which I mean, unfortunately, is something that I fall into the category of when it comes to dating. Like, I'm seen as less desirable because, like, I'm too independent. Which is hilarious because anybody that knows me knows that I like enjoy being around people and I enjoy like sharing things and stuff like that. But because I have a doctorate, I'm seen as being, oh, well, like she clearly knows where her things lie. So we better like let her do her thing. So I think it's just that thing that like, it's not always monetary. It's not always like something specific. It literally is the way that like perceptions come across.
Chelsea, Carly, you want to add anything to that?
I think Andrea and Cassie kind of hit a lot of points. Dating sucks in general for a variety of reasons. But I think relationships, it's a give and take of power. I don't think both people are always going to have an equal amount, and that's okay, but it's recognizing what the other person needs in that moment. So if you are the female and you have that career and you're working 10 hours a day, like it's important for your partner to recognize, hey, this person is doing above and beyond. Like I need to support them. And it doesn't have to be grand acts. And I think people get that misconstrued. Like it can literally be as simple as picking up Chinese food and then doing the dishes. Like it's simple everyday tasks to alleviate your partner's stress. And it goes with both parties, but just recognizing that power sometimes transitions and that's okay. And it's not even power, it's just the person who can handle what's going on at the moment because life hits you in multiple ways. But then with Kassie talking about the independence, yeah, like it's intimidating in a lot of different ways. And men you get bothered by it. Like they see someone who knows what they want and they check them off the list. Like, oh, that person's never going to budge on wanting to do X, Y, Z. So.
Before we go on, Carly, was there anything you wanted to add?
Well, I do agree that everybody definitely had some solid points there. And to go with the dating and men versus women, and this kind of relates to social media as well. Mm-hmm. You do have your female extremists, obviously, but you also have your male extremists like Andrew Tate and characters like that who are extremely, extremely, extremely disrespectful and says disgusting things. My woman better do this, and for me, that, this, that, the other. Which is not the case in this day and age. Like I said, we have a lot of independent, hardworking, educated women out there who sometimes don't have time to fulfill all of these roles. So I think that is also something that's super important. And he's horrible.
Kassie, you said you wanted to add something, and great point, Carly.
Yeah, so when you said Alex Tate, like that, so I'm gonna be honest, I don't know a whole lot about Alex Tate. I know like the highlights and Andrew Tate. I'm sorry.
Hey, we're a reputable podcast. We got to call people by their real names, man.
Well, he also has a brother. What's his brother's name? Because like
Tristan.
There you go. Okay, just checking.
Well, so anyway, you can tell exactly like how much I know about this Tate person, right? And I mean, part of that's the fact that I essentially like work 24/7. But my thing that kind of comes up with this on the extremist thing is that just like with so many other like minorities, I think that one of the like things that drives me absolutely bonkers is when like there is some sort of like extremist that kind of comes out and says, oh, well, like clearly like this, and this, and like then the opposite side runs with it, right? Mm-hmm. I get so frustrated when I have people who like kind of cry wolf to a degree. Mm-hmm. And I'll explain why this relates back to Tate. But my issue is like when we're having these conversations about gender, race, equity, like anything that kind of like we know are these big pieces that we need to work on as a society, is the people that use those buzzwords and say that people are doing things like that are racist or sexist or things like that. And then it makes the entire movement look horrible. Like it makes it completely null and void. So, I mean, one of the big things tends to be like, oh, well, like I'm not getting my way. So now I'm going to say that you're like sexist or you're racist or you're something. And like the rest of the people in the room are like, what are you talking about? Like you have real reasons for like being denied this. And this happened actually with a friend of mine, essentially like probably one of the nicest people in the world that I've ever met. Does a phenomenal job as like somebody who is a huge advocate, very like not going to have a huge conversation with you about like how great he is by any means. But essentially like what happened is he's been working with somebody for like X number of years. And he finally said like, okay, like that's just not a great idea. Like something that person really like decided to latch onto. And instead of like having a conversation about it, this person essentially said that he's a sexist. And then later on made a casual comment in front of like an entire group and said, oh, you know what? I think you get along with Tate. And literally I had like a visceral reaction to this when I got told this, because the other thing is like this person's very responsible, went to HR, self-reported it, and essentially like 100% when you look at him, he fits kind of like into that stereotype that you could see something like that happening. Well, it turns out like they ran the numbers on like people that he's like promoted, advocated for, things like that. His division actually has the most women in the most powerful positions. And I mean, he literally like doesn't try to do that. But to have somebody turn around and like just get mad about it and be like, oh, well, like you're clearly like a sexist. And then to compare somebody to somebody like Tate. Like those are the things that make the feminist like name bad. It makes it into feminazi. It makes it into like XYZ. And it drives me nuts because these like really good things that we could use to push the world forward then get these names of, oh, well, like can't be associated with that. They're going to cry like wolf or something like that. And I mean, we've seen it in several like cases that are on television and things like that, or like judicial cases and things where you're just like, okay, this is the reason that we have a bad like rap, is that if you call it these things just because you're mad about it, not because there's actually a basis, like that's a problem. So I mean, there's definitely like that other side of it where there are people who are like, oh, well, like I can use this to my advantage. And you're like, that's not where that fits. So sorry. I just got on like the Tate thing. Just
no, that's a good
reminded me of
point.
that.
And man, well, for everyone who's known me on this thing, Cassie's known me the longest on here, and then followed by Chelsea and then Andrea and Carly. Well, you guys know, obviously, when I want to learn something or do something, I put a lot of effort into it. I mean, just yesterday, not knowing what the hell we were going to talk about, I had like 50 different women sites and YouTube things just going through my brain. So I felt like Andrew was going to be brought up. I think the thing, and this is even just a him thing, this is for all those quote unquote extremists out there. We have to, like you said, Cassie, be careful when we do label someone something like a name, like a sexist or a racist and all of that, because like Chelsea and Andrea have said earlier, unfortunately, in this planet Earth, the most viral things that make you the most money are controversial negative comments. It's just the truth. But if those things didn't go through and then it was just a blank slate and you heard a man talking about how men's mental health gets underreported, which is a fact, how men kill themselves 3 times more than women, which is a fact, how you need to work on yourself, all that jazz, yada, 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 you'd be like, this person is fantastic. Great. But then once you slap that name, you're like, well, that's just bullshit because they've said this, and that. Like, I don't agree with everything the dude said. I really don't. But the things about mental health, especially as a guy, and like that perception that if you're a guy and you say you have mental health issues, you're deemed weak by most society, like that stuff, I 100% agree with because it's the truth. So it's just a thing with everyone. Everyone has shitty takes and everyone has good takes. And yeah, that's really it. Not really defending him, just saying he does have good stuff he has said. It's just some of his stuff is pretty woozy, and I get it's for his financial gain.
I was wondering if Woozy was going to make an appearance on this podcast.
Nah, absolutely. It's like a buzzword for this thing.
You were going to say something, Cassie. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, so Martin, I think it's so great that you like bring that up. Like the thing is, and I mean, obviously, again, I don't know a whole lot about the Tate situation. I just know what I've heard. But that's the thing, like that gets so construed with such a like you do something horrible and it's gonna cover that up. And the thing is like that covers it up for everybody, right?
Yep.
And I mean, you're so right though. Like men literally don't feel comfortable talking about their mental health. They are more likely to actually complete suicide because they use more lethal means. And the other thing is like they feel isolated. Like if you watch, and again, like I'm a TikTok junkie, so take what you want with what you want. But one of the biggest things is like not being able to have a conversation about the fact that like you don't have anybody to talk to, like that is so messed up. And the vast majority of men will tell you like I don't feel comfortable talking to other people about my mental health because, well, then you're just not like, you're not man enough, which by the way is a great podcast that everybody should listen to. Because they like actually dive into all of this cultural stuff at a much deeper level. But that's kind of like one of those things that when we talk about feminism, like those are the things that should come to the forefront. Like the like conversations about mental health for men, the fact that women are still expected to do too many things in the household. Like those are the conversations that should be happening, not like, oh, well, like she's so stuck on like men hating. It's not men hating. It's literally like wanting everybody to have the things that they need because society has told us for so long that those aren't feminine enough. They're not masculine enough. I mean, and that's the thing, like we just, as a culture, we need to reshape those conversations.
There's hurt on both sides because Kassie, I had the same thought immediately talking when Martin, you brought up how Tate has talked about, you know, the suicide rate for men. I believe the highest rate of suicide is for men between the ages of, is it like 40 and 50?
I actually have it up. Oh, this is the right side, or this is embarrassing. Keep going, Andrea. Let me make sure.
Oh, okay. But like, that's part of like, I feel like what people have ignored or like have, because of the whole negative aspects of feminism, it's the blinders get put on, but part of the tenets is equality across. And so just how women have been expected to be more nurturing, more this, more that, more this, men on the opposite end have been required to be more stoic, push their feelings down, made to feel uncomfortable about voicing normal emotions. Like there's hurt on both sides, and feminism would benefit and does benefit, tries to benefit both sides, and making it that it's the human experience to have a full range of emotions. It's the human experience and need to be able to talk about your feelings and things like that. So there's a lot about feminism that just gets completely covered over because since the root is feminine, for some people, it automatically means, okay, then masculine people would not benefit. Or like it was mentioned earlier, I think multiple people said about like the tear down versus kind of the lift up. And honestly, in certain aspect, as much as like the patriarchy benefits men, it has also hurt them especially in the emotional realm, which is where we would want everybody to have an equitable human experience, have their full needs met, being comfortable to be 100% who they are. I mean, and it starts early. It does. I mean, the whole boys can't play with dolls, girls shouldn't play with trucks, although it's more socially acceptable for girls to like traditionally boy hobbies and toys and etc. But you put it in the reverse, and then you start getting hurtful names thrown at you. I've never heard a hurtful name thrown at a girl that likes boy stuff. I've only ever heard tomboy. If y'all have heard a different word, and tomboy has been seen as like a compliment. So for a tomboy to be a compliment, but I mean, one of the old school words, I guess, is sissy, like a sissy boy. Like obviously that's not a nice thing to call anybody. So it's, again, equitable between, we want everybody to be the fullest and best versions of themselves. for everybody, and that's kind of the goal of feminism.
Yeah, and to go off Carly's thing too, because I have heard and listened to a lot of his stuff. A lot of this is just him, but it's a whole bunch of like there are some stuff where he says, and I'm like, I don't think that's right, man. For like, that's my opinion. Like, I don't think that's right. Like, I don't personally think the entire world's problems of homelessness, AIDS, cancer, and all that would be solved if women had their body counts on their forehead. I don't agree with that. It's a full context in the interview, but
he said that.
He said the world's problems would be solved if women had their like body counts on their forehead. It's like an hour-long thing. Like that was the main snippet that got cut out, but all these people
love to see it. Great.
But all these people too, I would say back to just Cassie's thing is like, you could say a lot of good things, but that one negative thing just blankets everything. And just from like the man's perspective of those people, where if your main message is, you want to build people up, you want to help them like get jobs and have confidence in yourself, which a lot of these like manosphere in quotes podcasts do, 100% agree with them. I think the thing what gets people is like when you're saying all that and then you start saying things like that, like berating, like degrading women, even though you don't think you are, which if that's what you don't think you are, maybe you just need to sit down with someone, but I think everyone can do better. But then you go on the flip side and you have a top, I don't know if you guys have heard of this young lady. I think I've sent you this before. And Pearly Little Things or something like that. Pearly White, whatever on YouTube. She's a big YouTuber woman. And she has said too that the root of all evil is birth control. And she said when women got birth control, they were allowed to just do whatever the hell they want and didn't have consequences. And she's also a person who said women shouldn't be allowed to vote because they don't go to war and fight on the front lines. Why should be allowed to vote? So my thing is, as women yourselves, when you hear another woman who has a prominent voice, over 1 million YouTube.
She does. And when you sent that to me, I had never heard of her before. I'd never seen anything from her before. Oh, my blood boiled.
So what does that do as like a woman hearing a prominent woman in a space say that stuff?
For me, I straight up feel conflicted. I straight up feel like, okay, as a feminist, like you are entitled to your opinion.
Mm-hmm.
As a human, you're entitled to your opinion. But like, wow, like to go so far as to take a right away because it's perceived that women aren't allowed. That's no longer true. If I understand correctly, women are allowed to serve on the front lines. It's just, again, the drafting piece comes in, and that's a whole other thing. I really don't think there should be a forced draft, but regardless, that's a conversation for a different time. It makes me feel conflicted because I would want to be able to like have that conversation with her, because like what rings in my ears when I hear stuff like that is internalized misogyny. And it is a byproduct of the patriarchy. It's the whole idea of you ingratiate yourself with those in power, kind of letting the suffering you're trying to escape yourself continue, or just put you above, but you're still not going to get that same level of privilege. It really makes me feel conflicted. It makes me feel angry, but at the same time, it's unfortunately growing up where I grew up, it's not that hard to kind of have that fed to you and for you to just keep that thinking going. And especially, I don't know if this is a fact, but there are people who put purposefully controversial and hurtful things out there just to gain or maintain popularity.
Mm-hmm.
So part of me wonders, like, any person kind of saying things that I find completely wild, do they actually believe this? Or are they just saying this because they want to be relevant? Maybe it's a little bit of both. Maybe it's none of the clout chasing which scares me even more. And it's just a lot of different emotions depending on what angle I'm looking at it under.
Carly, what are your thoughts when you hear stuff like that from like a prominent, again, 1 million subscribers on YouTube saying stuff like women shouldn't be allowed to vote unless they're on the front lines, or birth control has been the death to women? Like, what are your thoughts on that, Carly?
Again, Andrea kind of hit the points. It's kind of crazy that she would say something like that. I'm kind of speechless. I don't really know what to say. I think that's very wrong.
Fair enough. I mean, I agree with you. But that is what she said. And if you want, I can send you, I would have to dig, but I can send you so you can listen to it from her voice. And she's not like an old person. She's literally like in our age range. She's around like 27 to 30. So
Real? I thought she was younger.
she's about 27.
Okay.
Kassie.
I'm dying. I like so here's where I Andrea is much nicer than I am. The problem is I'm also deeply ingratiated in psychology. So like obviously like you're a product of your environment. And I feel very, very strongly about that. It kills me when I see women essentially like it feels like a lot of self-hate. And I have such a hard time wrapping my head around that. Just because like that's not how I was raised. I was definitely raised in an environment like as far as like where I lived and where school was, but like I think I might have said this before, like my dad is like the little blue dot in a very red like situation. And I mean my mom is too, but like my dad is always he picks fights just because he wants to pick fights about politics. I have unfortunately inherited that portion of him. But I think that this is an aspect that's really just like really boggled my mind for the last couple years. If I'm going to be perfectly honest, like since Trump got elected, like, and it is what it is, right? I'm pretty sure that it's not a surprise to anybody that I'm a liberal, but like there are people in my life that like 100% like just like drove home like Trump. And there was points where I looked at them and I'm like, you have a teenage female daughter and you just essentially voted for a man that said it's okay for like non-consensual touching. And like that breaks my heart on so many levels that it's not even funny. And I mean, Trump or not, like it's the message that came through with it at the time, which again, we all get into our silos of like what we're going to see in media, especially if like you've never seen the there's like a movie on Netflix about it. Like watching that's really mind-boggling because like we all know that our internet searches and things like that really divide us, and like it's crazy how deep that goes. But to hear other women say that they shouldn't have rights, like I just don't get it. And it's one of those things that I am a woman, so it's probably the reason that it's really hard for me to wrap my head around that one. But it pains me to hear people say that we don't deserve rights just like anybody else. I obviously I have no idea who you're talking about. But when we talk about those things and we sit down and we hear this rhetoric that's coming from these people that have large bases of people that listen to them and take into context what they're being told, spread information like that. It just like it makes me wonder exactly like how are we ever going to like move forward? How do you live a life where you don't think that you're entitled to kind of those like basic like human rights with other people? And I mean, if we're going to go by like if you're not on the front line, then you shouldn't get to vote, then like a bunch of people should not be voting regardless of gender, right? Because, I mean, we know there's plenty of people that aren't going into the army and fighting on the front line, even if you're in the army or in the Marines or in the Navy or anything. Like, statistically, that just makes no sense. But also just the fact, like, I have done a lot of mental gymnastics in the last couple months, but man, that one's hard for me to wrap my head around.
Kassie and Carly, I sent it to you both, the voting thing, so you can listen to it at your own leisure. It's a YouTube short. So I think with that, like, I think what Andrea said too about like saying things for popularity or stuff like that, or like Kassie, you saying product of your environment. And then sometimes people just wholeheartedly believe what they believe. Like, that's just a hard truth that we all have to accept with people. Like, it's just like you wholeheartedly believe that. And Kassie, you brought up the thing about Trump and the things he said during like his presidency. I mean, one of the most famous ones was "grab her by the pussy," and like that became like t-shirts and all that jazz. Don't want to go too much into this topic because obviously there's a 2-hour podcast on this, but make sure you listen to that one as well. The tied for most listened one of 2022. Obviously, Roe v. Wade went down last year in 2022. You, Andrea, Kassie, Andrea, Chelsea, and your friends, Kassie, talked about it extensively on there. So don't want to go too much, but I think that if that wasn't the wake-up call for some people, then there's just not going to be. And that's just the truth.
Going off of that, I feel like, not to be overly dramatic, but truly, if that wasn't a wake-up call, they're not going to get the wake-up call until we're all wearing the red cloaks, and which is a Handmaid's Tale reference if anybody listening has not read the book or seen the Hulu series, where essentially women that are able to produce children and are not deemed, I don't want to use the word clean, but moral enough to be a wife, are therefore used as vessels for creating children, and subjugated. When even the wives are subjugated, women in general in this society are completely subjugated. But of course, you have, unfortunately, the tiers. So the wife would essentially be at the top. I'm not sure where you would put the aunts, but then you would have the handmaids, and below that, I believe you would put the Jezebels. Some people would put Jezebels above because they have a little bit more freedom within, unfortunately, the brothel space that they're in. But yeah, so it's a very interesting show. I have not read the book. I need to. I want to. But yeah, just if they didn't get it with Roe v. Wade going down, they're not going to get it to that level.
And then, Kassie, you brought up the point too about people voting for someone saying certain things when, like, if they have daughters and all of that stuff. I can't speak for all those millions of people out there, but I think a common thing is most people think that, but he wasn't talking about my person. Like, he wasn't talking about like my wife or my sister, or she wasn't. Like, as long as it doesn't happen to someone I care about, I don't care what they say. Like, that is a common.
Yeah, so that's actually it's a pretty big psychological phenomenon, and unfortunately, like, it's escaping my mind at the moment. But I mean, at the end of the day, like, if it doesn't directly impact you, like, there's no shoes to be walked in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing that, like, really, I think people struggle with a lot, is recognizing that, like, there is truly an aspect of, like, everybody else has a very different lived experience. There's actually a word called sonder, and it essentially is saying, like, the recognition of the fact that, like, the people around you live as just as, like, rich and vibrant of a life that you'll never know. And I try so hard to keep that in my mind as I, like, go through things like this. But the reality is like, I have a hard time. And again, I'm not everybody, right? Like, I'm a white middle class woman. who got lucky enough to be able to get a doctorate. And like, I have a lot of privilege, and I totally recognize that. Probably don't recognize all of it, but the biggest thing with all of this is like, I can't ever imagine saying, hey, I endorse that person that hurts people I love. And I think that that's kind of like where I get hung up on this is like, yeah, there's reasons for everybody, right? There's reasons for everything. I don't think anybody goes into it and is just like, you know what? I want to be an asshole today. I think that truly every person who goes through and does whatever that they want to do, that they see themselves as being the hero, or they see themselves as being the good person. Like, I've gone through plenty of scenarios where I'm sure people have villainized me, and I try really hard to make sure that I don't hurt people, but there's probably things that I've done that have hurt people. And if I don't know about it, that's hard. But the other thing is like being able to take that step back and recognize, oh, hey, like I'm not always going to be the person in the right, and being able to take that critical like piece and think about it and like really reflect on it. But again, I it's just so hard for me to sit down and say, you know what, I'm going to vote for this person because like I like the way that they want to do taxes. It's going to hurt my brother who's gay. It's going to hurt my cousin who's a girl. It's going to hurt like 15 different people, right? But I like this one aspect of them, or I like the general package that they're offering me. Just happens to be that they have questionable morals, and that's a values thing for me. Like, I value values above anything else. Whereas like there are definitely people who value like the monetary piece, and they think that they're doing the right thing. And I do encourage people like to think about the fact that like I don't know that anybody goes into their day being like, you know what, I really want to screw this person over, or I really like just I'm super vindictive, and I want to do this to hurt this other individual. I think that genuinely people tend to think that they're doing the best for everyone. Sometimes that's a little bit more self-serving, but that's just kind of like the aspect of it is like, I do walk that double-edged sword where I'm like, okay, I can see why you think this, but like also like this is kind of like why I see this way. And it's actually funny. There's a huge trend on TikTok right now where like people joke about like having to change their political views in order to like write a paper that's supported in facts. And what's so interesting is seeing other people who have changed their minds over time, but then there are people who haven't changed their like minds or haven't had that experience to have that change. And it's just interesting to see that like difference in those viewpoints. Sorry, I just get very passionate about these things, and I realize I talk too long.
Okay. Carly, did you want to add anything about that? You have a unique perspective because obviously, well, you weren't a mom then, but let's just say 15, 16 years down the road, Trump Jr. is running and he's saying like the same things, if not worse. Like, how do you navigate that stuff with like your family?
So I personally would not get an abortion, but I have no right to tell anybody what they're going to do with their body.
Mm-hmm.
So I say we leave it alone. It's such a touchy subject. Yeah, personally, like I said, I wouldn't do that. But again, women have their own right to do what they would like to do. And Roe versus Wade also protects a lot of other things as well, like birth controls, even interracial marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And topics of that as well. And I was like, oh my gosh, are we like grandfathered into that? Like, how does this work if they take it away?
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of concerning. But yeah, I have no right to say what anybody else does with their body.
Oh,
and I'll leave it at that.
Fair enough. So let's go to funner things before we go onto one last super serious thing.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you.
So we'll go from fun to then serious again. Andrea and Carly. Andrea, obviously, like are My Hero enthusiasts on the pod, talk about My Hero. You do all the anime stuff with the guys. Carly, you've talked about like women in video games and all of that stuff. So, and Kassie, you've also done stuff about Sailor Moon on here. All those things for a time used to be, as the quote unquote only for guys. Like only guys watch anime, only guys play video games. And obviously a huge shift in that has happened, especially in 2023. So just how do you guys feel about like those things being more open to women to explore, enjoy without being like super judged?
Oh my goodness, I could write a book about this one. To begin, if any boy wants to smoke, I'll give it to him. Let's play 1v1.
Do it, Carly. Do it.
Oh my God.
The video game community is still very, 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 very toxic to women. Like before I was with Chucky, I wouldn't even go on the mic because I was like, I don't want to talk to these guys. They're just going to say disgusting, horrible things to me. And now that I've got him as like my little support pillow, I'll come in and I'll talk what I need to talk. But oh my goodness, they're just get in the kitchen. I was like, can you come up with something else? And then sometimes they're like talking about rape and they're like, oh, I bet you're a big fat BI, and like they just say horrible, inappropriate things. And I actually did see a TikTok on this not long ago where it was an Australian gaming community where they had men disguise themselves as women with like their voice changers. And they were like, oh man, that is like extremely, extremely toxic. So they kind of got a taste of what it's like to be a woman in the gaming community.
Andrea, anything you want to add from the anime perspective?
I mean, I haven't experienced it too much, thankfully. I have seen, I've read stories, I've seen TikToks, or well, actually reels of TikToks on Instagram because I don't have a TikTok. But kind of going over how in the anime community, I mean, gatekeeping, it's just like sports, gatekeeping. Oh, you watch this show. What's the name of this episode? Or when exactly does this happen? And it's like trying to test the knowledge because it was somehow, I just saw this. It was like a woman being interested in a quote unquote guy's hobby somehow makes it attacks their masculinity because a feminine person enjoys it. So it's like it was held as like this is a masculine space, but now that women enjoy it, it's no longer a masculine space. So I have to prove my masculinity or prove that she's not into it the way that we are to reestablish that level of maybe control, power. They probably used a different word that I'm not remembering right now. But luckily, I have not experienced that. I have heard, I do want to go to my first convention ever. I have heard some concerning stories about women that do cosplay. A lot of cosplays are, by the character's design, pretty revealing. And so kind of I've read stories about, somebody in cosplay. Yeah, it's very normal to go up to them and be like, hey, can I get a picture? And that's great. But if anybody says no, or you're not overly friendly, then people get hostile, or they're taking the photo and people get too touchy and relate like too close, which in theory, these people are perfect strangers. And because I'm dressed as your favorite character or a character you find attractive, you feel like you have, because I agreed to do a picture with you, you feel like you have the right to touch me any certain way without asking me first, or just it's kind of assumed that I should be willing to let you do that. And that's very concerning and toxic. But I mean, there's improvement in all of the spaces and allowing and making it be quote unquote cool. I will say I have personally heard more comments about like, oh, well, if she plays video games, she's just doing it because she wants to be a cool girlfriend, or oh, she watches anime, she only watches it because her boyfriend watches it. Like she doesn't actually like it. Like it diminishes our level of interest, which is not necessarily true. And so what if somebody's boyfriend got them into a video game? If they continue playing after that relationship is over, or they continue playing through the relationship, whatever, they might become more passionate about it than their husband, boyfriend, whoever. Like just because somebody starts it one way doesn't mean it's not true, like a true enjoyment of something. And just because a woman has a quote unquote primarily male hobby or interest doesn't mean she's doing it to pander to men and make her more quote unquote desirable. Yeah.
Kassie, was there anything you wanted to add to what Carly and Andrea said?
No, I mean, I agree with everything that they said. Like, that's the thing that's always been really funny to me is like I've always inherently had, I guess, a more like masculine interests. Like I enjoy lifting. I hate cardio. And it's the same thing with like anime and things like that. I think that one of the things that is frustrating is obviously like there is like that aspect of it, like anime, that there's always very large boobs and a very large butt, and like obviously those aren't necessarily even real things, unless you happen to be like that one like 0.1%, or you happen to get really like a lot of plastic surgery in order to achieve that. But I think that that's like the ridiculous thing is like we have gatekeeped this like situation where anime is for men and it's not for women, and like who cares who likes what? For the love of God, like find something else to worry about. And that's the thing, like it's part of me wonders if it even has anything to do with the like things that we're interested in, and more to do with the fact that like, oh well, there's like a female here, so I shouldn't say the things that I like normally wouldn't say if they weren't here, because that's really more what it's about. It's not that I like the same anime as you, it's the fact that like, oh, I can't say stuff that's socially inappropriate at this point because there's somebody here to call me on my bullshit. But the other thing is like, if you're embarrassed about it there, maybe you should rethink what you're doing in the first place. So, I mean, there's a little bit of that where like, it's just kind of rubbing that part of the brain that's like, oh, this isn't okay. It wasn't okay 10 minutes ago when she wasn't here, but it's really not okay now. So I think it's just one of those things that causes cognitive dissonance for a lot of people.
So just
sorry.
No, go ahead, Carly. I was just going to add.
I was going to add to both of them had mentioned how women are portrayed a little bit unrealistically in animes and as well as video games. And I follow a lot of like video game pages on Twitter and Facebook and whatnot. And some of these posts that come up are very inappropriate. Like, I don't know if you guys have heard of The Last of Us, but the protagonist is a teenager in the first game. And they say and make inappropriate images of a teenager. So kind of eye-opening. It's very kind of disgusting. Well, it is disgusting. I think that, and of course, it's awesome that they're going to put beautiful women in games. I love that. But there's a point where it gets very uncomfortable, and I believe men take it a tiny bit too far.
So, two things. One, Kassie, on your point of who cares what someone likes, very popular anime that's relatively new. My Dress Up Darling. If you haven't seen it, check it out. The main female protagonist, she's the main character of the show. She's into cosplay. The male protagonist, he gets made fun of because he's into like knitting and like doing stuff. It was like stuff he did with his grandfather. And she had the quote, does being a girl or boy matter when you really like something? So your quote reminded me of that. And then the thing to what Carly and Kassie said about the unrealistic things, how women are portrayed in like anime and video games and stuff too. I would also say too, obviously it's also on the men's side too, because there's not that many 14-year-olds on planet Earth who look like the fucking Rock. And I mean, it's just one of those things that we're all old enough that we do know. I mean, sex sells. It sells in anime. It sells in movies. It's the unfortunate thing of planet Earth. Even if you go from like the quote unquote American side of things, when you look at like the male and female like superheroes or people of that, ain't none of them ugly. And I mean, and they're all in the 1% of the 1%. Not every woman on this planet is looking like Scarlett Johansson, and not every dude on this planet is looking like Chris Hemsworth. It's just on the unfortunate nature of the beast on those sides. But so do we want to do another fun thing, or do we want to just go to the last serious thing? It's up to you guys.
Martin, let's do something fun.
But we just did some. Okay. So there are more women CEOs in Fortune 500 companies. That's a fun. We were talking about that earlier.
Like ever in history, or like out of the 500, like Fortune 500 companies, there are now more women CEOs out of that 500, like those
all time high.
Got you.
So
okay.
9% of the Fortune 500, what are they called? CEOs is now women. So that is 46 women right now. Of those CEO, 10 are women of color. So that's good. Still ways to go. Obviously, this past year, probably the most successful women's team in sports history, the women's U.S. soccer team won that lawsuit, so they got equal pay in that regards. There's been more women politicians who have won races, so that's happy things. Now, does it matter? I asked Chelsea this when we did our Rihanna pod. So if a woman like becomes president of the United States one day, does it matter to you which aisle they sit on? Are you going to be more mad they weren't on your aisle, or general scope happy that I saw a woman make it to the highest office in the land? Like, how does that work?
My personal opinion, but I actually will direct that question back to you. But for me, like if she's on the opposite aisle, like in general, like you would celebrate as a woman, even if you don't necessarily fully agree with the politics. Hopefully there aren't any moral questions, because if that's the case, then probably not. But it would also kind of depend, because like you can be on the opposite aisle, but not be actively taking steps to put women back.
Very true.
So like that's kind of like, as long as you're not putting women down, other women down, trying to gatekeep, like re-cement the glass ceiling you just broke, like you kind of would want to be happy about it. And the reason I wanted to flip that question to you was wondering if you kind of knew anyone when Obama was elected president that they didn't necessarily agree with his politics, but were also Black. Like, from what I understood watching it, it seemed like most people, I shouldn't say everybody, even if they didn't agree with him as a politician, were proud that we finally had a Black president of the United States.
Yeah, there's a little bit of both. I mean, people were proud, but then it's like once you get past that, it's like, all right, what are you actually going to do in office, et cetera, et cetera. And it's funny how you brought him up, because the reason I brought that up is thinking back in 2008, if McCain would have won, would Sarah Palin have gotten as much love as Kamala Harris did when she became the first vice president? Because Sarah Palin, people forget, she was John McCain's. I don't know how I got
McCain.
Oh, she was John McCain's running mate, and if they would have won, this would have been back in 2008. We would have had a female vice president. I don't think that question's been asked. Like, if she would have gotten just as much love as Kamala did.
That's a good point. My personal feelings is I probably wouldn't have been as overjoyed because, again, going back into it, I feel like from what I remember of the time, because I believe that the first election I was in 8th grade. But it seemed to me, and this was before I even had my liberal awakening, as I'll call it. She she kind of was rubbing me the wrong way. There were things that I really felt that she, like, it really felt like her being put there wouldn't have done a lot for actual, like, female progression, other than the fact that she would have been the first female vice president, if that makes sense.
Anyone else have any thoughts on that?
Carly, do you want to go first? Because I feel like I just monopolize things.
Monopolize.
Carly just put in the chat that she's going to be right back. So I don't know if she's back.
Oh,
yet.
I thought she said that she was back. I'm sorry.
Oh, she is. My bad.
I'm back now, but I definitely missed some stuff. So y'all can just keep going. I'm listening.
Okay. So truthfully, I feel like Sarah Palin would have totally missed the mark for me. She was actually probably more of a concern to me back then, because I would have been, I think you said it would have been 2008, right?
It was 2008, yeah.
Yeah, so I would have been a junior in high school. So I was, like, aware enough to at least, like, be kind of paying attention. Man, I really wish I could say that I would have been excited, but I think I would have been, like, mildly terrified. And I don't, truthfully, it's not even because of the politics on that one. Like, there were a lot of things that she said that obviously, like, discounted her in terms of, like, her intelligence and things like that. And I think that really kind of, like, overshadowed potentially any, like, good that she could have done. So I have a hard time, and this is kind of like where I am politically just in general, is like, I don't have to like your politics, but I better at least respect, like, how you got there. And that's kind of like, that's a bigger piece for me politically than anything else. But I think that the other thing is like, we sit here and we talk about, like, okay, president, vice president, right? Really big ranking positions, but, like, we're not talking about the fact that, like, there's how many women on the Supreme Court right now that just ripped a lot. Like, and again, I don't remember how they voted, but, like, there were women part of that, like, conversation in terms of removing, like, removing the only constitutional right that has ever been removed. And so, like, that's where I sit with those things, is like, oh, okay, like, it's not about politics, it's about human decency. And I think that in situations like that, yeah, like, if you're gonna, like, come and, like, start doing a lot of stuff that I'm like, wow, like, morally this is a problem, the same way that Andrea is, like, that's gonna diminish, like, what genitalia you have or genitalia or, like, gender identity you have. Like, the thing is like, cool, I would love to have a female president, right? But I don't want that at the cost of, like, having more rights stripped away. And I think that's kind of, like, something that has probably matured in me over time as I've gotten older. Just because, I mean, like, I would have been stoked to, like, have somebody, I mean, there's a big piece to that. Like, having somebody who looks like you is a big piece. Especially when they're in those high ranking positions. But the other thing is, like, I mean, that all gets washed away if you're taking away, like, rights and you're, like, going against, like, my core beliefs.
Fair enough. So those are all good points. I just was thinking about that just randomly on a Saturdays, and then I knew we were having this podcast, so I wanted to definitely bring it up to you ladies too, because I guess it's I guess also, like, for example, if the first, it won't be her because she's not in tech and all that, but, like, if the first trillionaire ever is Kim Kardashian, and the first trillionaire, if it would be, I mean, she's probably would be the one who'd be closest to ever get there as a woman. first trillionaire ever is a woman. Great. But it's Kim Kardashian, and we all know how it all started. Like, how would you then feel about like that?
Carly, you want to start us off?
Sure. Like you said, it's great that she's a woman.
Mhm.
I I don't know. I don't really have much to say about Miss Kim K. I think that she does some great things, like in the court systems, and she works with the presidents and lowers people's convictions and things of that nature. So I don't want to totally knock her down, but she doesn't have the greatest case record either. I think that she can be a little whiny, and her rise to fame, although her dad was very famous, a lawyer, but I would, it's cool if she was the first woman trillionaire, but I think there's other women out there who work very hard and practice what they preach, and there may be better candidates.
Andrea, Kassie.
I actually wonder if Rihanna might actually be the one to hit $1 trillion first. I don't want to.
Well, I don't think anyone's ever going to hit it. It's just if.
My fingers are crossed for Rihanna. But anyway, for me, I feel like with how her name busted into the scene, she was first kind of associated with Paris Hilton as being her, was it like her closet organizer, her best friend?
Her secretary.
Yes, thank you. And then the sex tape came out. Because it happened so long ago, I feel like she can, and most likely has, I don't keep up with the Kardashians, haha, but I feel like she has grown, hopefully, as a person since then. So I don't want to feel like knock her success based off of like that happening, because like Carly said, she has done good. She does bring some awareness to certain things, which is great. But at the same time, and I feel like this is hitting on the same double standard where with Kim, like she does these great things, but then we're always quick to slap the bad that she's done in the past or things that we don't agree with. Whereas like other people will only try to focus on the good that they did and kind of ignore the bad, but that's off on a tangent. I just feel like with that, congratulations, with that, pride that there's a female trillionaire, I would really hope for the learning, the recognition of some of the things that she and her family have done to really kind of keep themselves relevant, even if they didn't necessarily mean harm. I mean, there's a lot of discussions around their family for cultural appropriation. And I feel like none of them have really have grasped why it's brought up. I know this was brought up before, Kim married Kanye and they had kids, and Khloe had a baby, or two babies, excuse me, with Tristan, Kylie with what's his name?
Travis.
Thank you, Travis. So like there's been more recent conversations about how like, well, they now have Black children, so like they haven't specifically said that they're immune to it, but it's like that the blind spots of how even before they were connected to the community, they were appropriating certain things because it was popular and not really kind of giving straight up, not giving credit where it was due, just like the recent controversy with Hailey Bieber with the whole glazed donut lips, the dark liner around the lips with clear gloss. That's been a thing in ethnic communities for decades. And back in the 90s, early 2000s, it was, made fun of, specifically being considered ghetto or unattractive and blah, 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 blah. But I feel like with that level of, and going back to the VP thing, it's like, if you've been problematic, please learn and kind of like address it, I guess, is what I would want and hope for. Like, it's amazing. My other thing, bone to pick with Kim is, sorry, you're not self-made. Like, when she and her sisters have said, like, when Kylie became the first, when they said she was a self-made billionaire, your family had a lot of money to start. Like, that's not quite a fair descriptor. And I wish they would really kind of take the criticism, learn from it, and really kind of figure out where people are coming from with it, instead of just kind of like, well, I think this way because of this, and you guys stop giving me shit about it.
Kassie, is there anything you want to add to that? I will say that when we are talking about like women and stuff who look like the people in anime, the 1%, whatever, her family is, most of them are in that 1%.
I truthfully don't feel qualified to discuss Kim Kardashian. As far as like Kim Kardashian is concerned, I've lived under a rock the entire time she's been popular. Like, I know her name, but that's about it. I know she got popular off a sex tape. Again, that's my knowledge. So I mean, like, I think that there's just something like inherently different for me between like first trillionaire versus like somebody who's actually going to have like power over like my rights. Not now, to be fair, money is power, right? Like, we all know that. But at the same time, I don't know that I like have an opinion about the first trillionaire in the world.
Well, just if it's a woman you don't like, are you gonna congratulate them? Like, hey, I saw a woman do it. Like, any woman you don't like.
I mean, I'm not going to be ecstatic about it, obviously. Like, I'd love to see somebody who's like hardworking that actually got there. But like, we all know that the likelihood of somebody who's legitimately grinding to like get to a place, likely not going to be the trillionaire, because those are likely not going to be the things that are going to make buco bucks. Like, living an honest life and like working hard doesn't make trillions of dollars. And I mean, the other thing is like, and of course, I don't understand like the whole thing that happened with the sex tape at all. Like, I also have a hard time being like, oh, well, like she got famous off a sex tape. And I mean, it sounds like I was Googling it as we were talking about this.
Did you watch the tape?
No.
I'm just saying, when you said you were Googling it, I was
I was Googling to see like,
I've never seen the tape either, but like I've read like,
no, I was
Googling of what was on there, and that.
Well, and I truthfully, I was Googling, I was like, well, did she self-release it or did it like leak? And I mean, who knows? Because truthfully, really, who does ever know?
Apparently Chris, her mom.
You're right. Carly's right, because only one person benefited from that, and that was her, and Ray J's career died.
Yep. And then her mom watched it, I've heard, and she was the one who leaked it, quote unquote, leaked it. Her mother.
Okay, well, there's a whole host of psychological things going on there that I'm not going to touch with a 10-foot pole. But I mean, my thing is like, even if it was like on purpose that she released the sex tape, right? Like, part of me has a hard time being like, oh, well, like that's a really crappy way. Because like the other thing is like, some people legitimately like do that for a living. And I'm not talking about the people who get forced into it, like people who actually like choose to do it, and that's fine. Like that's part of kind of like autonomy, right? And I think that that's a conversation that we have a hard time around as women and as men in general, is like, okay, well, like this is cool, but like this is taboo, and like being able to kind of like shimmy along that like line. Again, I don't know. I mean, the person who gets rich, like there's plenty of people that are rich that I don't really care for, right? So I don't know that I like, truthfully, I'd probably just be kind of like annoyed. Like cool that a woman did it, but like it doesn't really add a whole lot to my life. Somebody else's bank account is not like going to impact me in any way.
Well,
So
then how
I
about
don't.
your, since perfect segue, about your bank account then? So I guess from like a woman thing too, where
Oh,
when we talk about like jobs and all of that stuff, and now the thing is, with like in the workforce, we talked about the CEOs and all stuff, but now the biggest thing, like OnlyFans. A majority of the content creators statistically are women. A majority of the people who consume it are men. And they have produced a lot of millionaires, but it's also produced a lot of issues. And you talked about hardworking. I mean, I know all three of you. I'm all educated, work hard, and all of that jazz. But unfortunately, because you guys did it in, I don't want to say the right way, and I don't want to say like the straight and narrow way, but those girls who decide to do that, you guys will never make as much money as them in your entire lives. Like, how does that then make you feel like from a like societal thing, like, oh, the only thing like I could get rich off of is showing my toes and other stuff on OnlyFans? I was gonna say butthole, but I just said toes. So
and then you went ahead and said butthole anyway.
I was going to, but thoughts?
Ah. Let's say, Andrea, if you got something, I think I need to.
I mean, Martin and I have already had this conversation plenty of times because I mean, it is. So I guess March is also like Social Worker Appreciation Month. I guess, Martin, did you know this?
Mhm.
Yeah. So obviously, as a social worker, most of the time you ain't getting paid shit, to be honest. So like it makes me feel frustrated, but at the same time, like you do you, boo boo. Just like that's great that you're able that's something you want. As long as you want to do it, you're consenting to do it. All of that stuff, like that's great. Um, but at the same time, like I kick myself sometimes, and Martin knows this, where I'm just like, dang, if I could like get myself to do this, maybe I would make more money. But at the same time, is for me personally, is making more money worth kind of overriding the values that I've had in my life? So the answer to that is no. So it just continues, and it's just kind of like a slight irritation. But at the same time, unfortunately, maybe not, because maybe ageism isn't as prevalent on OnlyFans. I don't know. But because a lot of times for like Instagram modeling or anything in general, there's a shelf life and it's short, and usually. However, maybe with OnlyFans being, more broad, there are women that are able to, I mean, it hasn't been around long enough, but maybe we'll see women that made it big, in these last 3 years, still making it big and rolling in the money when they hit 50, 60 years old, 70 years old. Like that would be great. But traditionally there is a shelf life.
Yeah.
And yeah, like that's unfortunate, and that gets into the whole ageism issue. But yeah, it sucks to know that it just sucks to know that I could make more money showing strangers my body than what I went to school for, learn skills for, and like am actively trying to help people with. Like that that really sucks, knowing that my value as a potential like sexual object outweighs me learning and trying to help other people. Like that is a tough pill to swallow, but that is currently where we are. And that's not knocking people that decide to do OnlyFans, sell pictures of their toes, like whatever. Like if that's what you want to do, as long as you're doing it with like you're not forcing yourself to do it. Of course, desperation, I don't mean like that. Like you aren't being forced to do it. But yeah, like as much as possible, I want to try to negate any sort of like women tearing down women narrative. So like that's what you want to do. That's what you enjoy doing. Awesome. Great. I just, it on the flip side for me personally, it's hard knowing that, yeah, taking my clothes off and putting it on the internet would potentially bring me more money.
I think also with the women tearing down women narrative or men tearing down men narrative, I think there's also a point where people are just like, it's not tearing down, you're telling someone the truth. Like like when you were talking about like the stuff of doing that, there's also the component, if you, like you said, if you do that, fine, but you also need to know, if you do that, you are never getting, if you want to go to a government job, you are never getting a government job in your life. Like that's just, you're never going to get a teaching job. You're not getting any of those things down, which I personally, well, except for the teachers who do the shit in their classroom. That is terrible. They should be fired.
Oh my God. That's a line. Bad. That's a line so big. No.
Like, so, but it's just real. It's not tearing down. It's like, hey, if you want to do it, fine. But do know, like you said, unfortunately, shelf life, that's a thing. And if you want to go into another career, that shit's on there forever. Like if you say, oh, it's underneath the paywall, honey, you go on Reddit, you can go find everyone's stuff. Like these people now, like you can't, it's just the truth. Carly, do you want to add anything to like your thoughts on like you're sitting there working super hard, a mom, and you're like, oh, this person's just doing this on OnlyFans and they're a millionaire and I'm slaving away, can't get ahead.
Yeah, so for me, it's definitely a respect and morals type of thing. Like I said, I'm not going to tear anybody down who does it. If that's the way you want to make your money, cool. But I think there's definitely certain consequences that come with it, like you and Andrea mentioned already. Can't be this certain job or can't get this certain role, which I see. And yeah, it is a little unfair. I think there's a lot more reputable ways to advocate for yourself and be a hard worker and do certain things that I don't want to say make women look good, but make women look good. I mean, I think that you can do a lot of good things, get an education or get a really good job or something that you passionately enjoy. I mean, if you enjoy that, that's your thing. Cool. But yeah, I just think it comes down to morals. And I think that sometimes the porn industry is very hurting. In a way, there's a lot of bad things on those sites that are getting consumed. I think for the most part, OnlyFans is probably consensual since it is somebody putting their own content out there, but you never know what their situation may be. But just porn in general, I don't know if this is true, but I saw TikTok that said Pornhub is now becoming somewhat like an OnlyFans because there was so much rape and child porn on Pornhub. And I heard that they took down like 70% of their content or like 10 million videos, which is extreme. So sometimes I think porn hurts more than helps.
Yeah.
Especially for women because they're typically a target in that sort of stuff.
And that's a whole other podcast for a whole other day. I would say for like, obviously, I mean, if you enjoy doing that stuff, no one's saying don't do it. Go get your money. It's a legal way, except for the child porn and all that jazz, because that is bad. I would also say too, when we talked about social media, I don't know, I just, from outside looking in, that's how it's from, I feel like social media has produced a lot of now, we talk about influential women voices in media and financially, but for some of the reasons like we just talked about, it's the people who, their choice, of course, or sometimes not, they sexualize themselves and that's how they get paid. So it's like, you're making all this money on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Snapchat, but we have to do that. Women sometimes have to do certain things to get that money, as to like men don't have to, as long as they're like Carly said. Carly, like, you know, a lot of the top female streamers stream it with like cat ears, with like bikinis and all that. And obviously like the top male streamers aren't streaming in like swim trunks.
Oh my goodness. And I was going to say the hot tub streams, the ASMR.
Yep, Mhm.
That's like, I don't understand how some of that content can be put up on like those certain streaming sites, because I'm like, wow. And I even saw this case. I don't remember the streamer, but he put a stream out and his girlfriend was like crying in the background because when he was streaming, he had pulled something out. I believe it was Pokimane.
Mhm.
It was deep fake porn of her, and
Mhm.
his viewers caught it. And he had to do this whole public apology
Oh,
in front of his crying girlfriend or fiance or whatever it was. And yeah, I don't know. It's very, very sexual on those sites.
yeah. So like
And
that's
that
it.
is ridiculous.
So that situation, like really quick. So a guy streamer, like you just said, deep fakes, but this is a whole other topic too about like how AI is gonna be potentially really bad. So someone made deep fakes of a girl who he is friends with, but then he found them like deep fakes of her like having sex or whatever. Begins to like he masturbates to the stuff, but then the girl who he's a friend with tells him that that is not her, and then that is obviously weird. And then he has a girlfriend and whole mess, super weird. So just imagine like your friends finding some deep fakes of you, and they're like, "That's not me," and then it's just a whole awkward thing. Food for thought, super strange. But last thing on here.
Can I say something about the OnlyFans thing really quick?
Oh, go ahead.
So I think that one of the things that is always interesting to me, and I think in general for a lot of women, is like the healing around like sexuality, and like being able to be a sexual being without being sexualized. And I think one of the things that like we kind of say like, oh well, like it doesn't take like a whole lot of like, you're not going to like school for like eons or whatever. And that's true, but I think that like a lot of the things that we talked about is like there are these imposed social structures on us as like individuals that you're paying one way or another, right? Like if you go down the OnlyFans route and you're identifiable in any way, shape, or form, and let's say that like maybe it is like maybe it's your only option to get out of your situation. And yeah, like to a degree, like it's considered consensual, but like the other part of it is like I need to be able to make sure that like my family can eat, or I need to be able to make sure that I can make rent, and like this is the one thing that I can do that is instantaneous that I know is going to get me to where I need to get to go. And we talk about like obviously like I freaking went to school for like 4,000 years and I'm in debt and I will continue to be in debt while I like try to help people. I paid in money. I paid in money, I paid in time, I paid in like dedication to that situation. People who are on OnlyFans that can now no longer run for a government job, can no longer like be a teacher, they paid in opportunities. And I think that it's really like one of those things where like I don't have any like issue with people going on OnlyFans and like doing whatever it is that they're doing. I'm not on OnlyFans, so I don't feel comfortable saying like what everybody's doing. But like when we talk about this, there's like so much of this aspect that we miss in terms of like society has put those like costs on us. It's not even necessarily us. Like it's literally like ingrained in us as women, in us as men. Oh, well, like if that person's on OnlyFans, like they're trashy. If that person's on OnlyFans, they can't be my kid's teacher. Be the smartest person on the face of the earth that got into a bad situation where like they just needed to do it. And I'm not saying everybody who's on OnlyFans is in a bad situation, but like there's this lack of like recognition that like sometimes the thing that you like look down on is really not like it wasn't an option. Like it's not because like I have questionable morals, it's because it's what paid the bills.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, like it's always going to be what pays the bills, right? Like being on OnlyFans versus being homeless with your I mean, even for people that have kids, like 2 kids, family, like all that stuff, like that, those are 2 very like drastic pieces. And I guess my thing is like do I wish that I could like get my degree easier and make money easier? Sure. is there also like a little bit of kind of like privilege that goes along with being able to be on OnlyFans? Like you have to be kind of traditionally like attractive to like make it anywhere, or you have to be willing to be essentially like fetishized. And I think that that's the thing is like we always think about money in terms of like monetary, but like the reality is everything has a price. And for a lot of people, that price is like, I just essentially said, like, I can't be a teacher. I can't be a police officer. I can't be a lawyer. I can't be a like governor. And it could be, we could have the next person who's going to like cure cancer, but oh man, they made an OnlyFans to make sure that their family could eat one time. Sorry, can't be doing that. So I think it was just one of those things that like, it's so interesting to me because like we talk about like our values and things like that. And I say the same thing, but at the end of the day, like, are those even my values or are those just the values that got imposed on me? Right. Like it's society telling me, oh man, you're not a good girl if you think that it's okay for somebody to be a sex worker. And that's bullshit. Like, you know, I don't know. That's my own box, but I just wanted to chime in because I think that there is like an aspect to this where like a lot of those values that tell us that, oh, this is bad, like have been imposed on us. It's not necessarily that like if we sat down and like my best friend did it. I'm not saying that my best friend did it, but like if my best friend did it, I would probably be more willing to like take perspective and be like, oh, well, like they were in this situation or they needed this, or maybe they just enjoy it and like that's their thing, like have at it. But I think that it's again that like perspective taking piece that always gets me.
The one of the things that I had when we initially put it in the group chat what we were going to talking about boxes. The first thing that popped in my head, and with your rant,
boxes. I
shouldn't call it a rant because rant has a negative connotation. For your very extended explanation,
it's a rant. Don't worry.
Okay, in-depth explanation reminded me of, the primary dichotomy of the Madonna versus the whore. That you're either a prude or you're a slut. Like it's one or the other, and that a woman can't exist and have, a sexual side and also be a good person. So like 100%, those were the boxes that came into my head during that group chat. And I wondered if we were eventually going to get to a point where I would like bring it up. But yeah, here it is. And that's totally true. Cause it's, 100%, like just because somebody is a sex worker, is on OnlyFans, doesn't mean they're not qualified to have a government position. Just because somebody has, is more open sexually or whatever, or has a past of being a worker because of a sex worker because of situations or just because they wanted to. Like if somebody's qualified for the position, that is their position. It's then also the expectation of, if you're going to be in certain roles, you have to be completely beyond reproach, which as a normal human being is completely impossible. Nobody is perfect. And so like, absolutely. I 100% agree with what you say. I think what I said earlier, kind of bringing in the morals, values, is just me not honestly willing to pay the social capital that it would take to, like the conversation, because again, I've had this conversation with Martin in a joking manner, just kind of being like, no, I couldn't do it. What if like my family ever found it? What if all of these other things, it's going to be attached to me for the rest of my life? Would I be okay with like starting to date and people found out and then they would dump me because of it? Like all of that. I'm not willing to pay the social capital for that actual potential monetary gain, because it's very true that you can be on OnlyFans and potentially not make shit.
That is true. The average person makes 7.2 a subscriber. This is the average. So basically almost like $150 a month. But like we've talked about social media, which I don't understand it because I've never like gone on the site. I don't know how every person on planet Earth is in the top 1% when everyone is not in the top 1%. That makes no sense to me. But those people get pushed and then they're showing their bank statement, how they're making millions. And no disrespect, some 22-year-old lady in Iowa ain't making millions. So
yeah, and that's for whatever reason. It could be just preference. It could be like maybe she's trying to be cautious and not showing any identifiers that she's like doing certain backdrops, or she's not showing her face, or maybe with OnlyFans, it doesn't have to be completely explicit. Maybe she only wants to do like bathing suits, or maybe she only does like it all depends on what the content is and what the audience wants. And it could also be, you know, a woman's tendency so far statistically to undervalue. And so maybe her subscription is worth more money per month, but she doesn't feel comfortable requesting that level of money per subscription. There's so many things tied into literally anything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so Andrea, just so you know, like that's kind of like I don't want to pay the social capital. Like, man, I'd love to sell like just pictures of my feet and get paid a whole lot, but I'm also like, like I don't want people to like think that I do things like that. Like, I mean, that's the thing at the end of the day. Like, I don't want to pay the social capital, and that, like, yeah, like, I mean, it's not something that I can get behind. I know people that do get behind it, and that's totally cool with me, but like it's so interesting, right? Like we talk about these things that are like, oh, well, like they got rich on like nothing. And you're like, actually, it's just not money. And I think that's the thing that like kills me, is that at the end of the day, it's all about money. It's all about money and power. Like those are the things that we're going after. Like it's either in the shape of like little green pieces of paper, which whoever decided that was a cool idea, whatever. But like it's either that or like who can I control? What can I control? Things like that. Like we all have different like ways of doing things, and it's just interesting the way that like life has shaped us.
To add to, I think this is kind of going towards the biggest barriers women probably face is like sexual assault.
Carly, fantastic tie-in. Perfect. Perfect, because that's where I was going next. Keep it up.
I was gonna mention Bad Baby. I don't know if you guys know who she is, but the moment she turned 18 years old, she made an OnlyFans and made a crap ton of money. And I'm not saying men don't go through sexual assault, all of that. They definitely do. But obviously it's more prevalent in women. It's 1 in 4 women, I believe. So
1 in 5 right now.
1 in 5. Okay.
Always underreported though, so let's be really honest.
For real.
1 in 4?
It says, let me see right now, because I actually have that. So this is actually the last thing. So we'll go into that. All right. So 1 in 5 women in the United States experience, completed, or I don't know what the hell. Okay, 1 in 5 women in the United States experience / or attempted or have an attempted rape during their lifetime. Nearly a quarter of men have experienced that, 25%. 81% of women and 43% of men have reported some form of sexual assault, because men is more underreported than women. That's more for the machismo thing, which is a whole other topic for another day. 1 in 3 female victims have experienced a sexual assault or an attempted one between the ages of 11 and 17. And then almost 1 in 4 undergraduate women experience sexual assault or misconduct at 33 of the nation's major universities. So at colleges, 51% of female victims of rape reported being raped by an intimate partner and 40% by an acquaintance. And then male, 52% by an acquaintance, 15.2% by a stranger. And then I don't know how the hell they calculate. The estimated lifetime cost of rape is $122,461 per victim. All right. Don't know how the hell that means, but
they probably factor in the medical care, the counseling, impact on employability.
You are right.
Other things. Yeah.
That's what they said. Good job. So when you guys hear that number, 1 in 5 women right now have experienced a rape in their lifetime. This is in the United States. What are your thoughts on that?
It's honestly disgusting. I'm not surprised. Unfortunately, we are in a big shithole of a world. Even sexual harassment is huge. And like I can name thousands of times I've been like sexually harassed, especially working in the restaurant industry. I don't know if anybody's ever worked in the restaurant industry here, but I've done that since I've been able to have a job while I'm going to school, yada, yada, yada. Like freaking 15 years old. My manager's like, ooh, I like the way you bend over and clean that table. I like to look down your shirt. Like, said this to me at 16 years old. So it is very, very, very prevalent in our day and age. And that is so unfortunate, but I am like not at all surprised.
Kassie, Andrea?
I think the thing that almost hits harder than the statistic, because like we've heard the statistic so many times, is like the lack of surprise that comes along with it. Honestly, I expect it to be a higher prevalence rate. I thankfully can't remember a time where something like that has happened to me. It's the one thing that I think is kind of nice about the fact that I apparently look like a bitch 24/7 is that people stay away from me. Probably the reason I'm also
way to look at it. Sure.
I mean, well, the thing is though, is like I have friends who like get harassed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I look kind of grumpy most of the time, and it keeps most people away from me. Part of that is a protective factor because quite honestly, like I do a lot of stuff and I've been in a lot of places. I've moved to places by myself, which means being by myself a lot of the time. And the thing is like on the other side of that, like it's probably prevented me from finding like a partner. And that's kind of like sucky, is that like the thing that protects me is the thing that's also probably preventing me from like being able to like hit these other milestones that I'd like to hit in my life. And I think that that's kind of like the really screwed up thing, is that again, it's not surprising. Like it's genuinely surprising to me that it's not higher, but at the same time, we know that it's underreported in both women and men. And you watch things like the case that happened when what's his face was running for Supreme Court.
Kavanaugh, whatever his name is.
Yeah, Kavanaugh.
Yeah.
Like you watch stuff like that and you're like, okay, like man, like let's get to like the fact that there's even like a question to bring to a Supreme Court, like that seems maybe we should look a little deeper into that. This woman comes up and says, hey, these things happen to me. And people are like, well, why did you wait until now?
Mm-hmm.
What? I'm sorry. Like, why does it have to be right after? Like, do you have any idea how traumatizing it is to not have control over your own body? Like, to have somebody invade literally the deepest parts of you. And like, the thing is, like, we talk about like the physical ramifications, but like, God, like getting literally your autonomy, like your personal autonomy taken away from you. If I can shove it down into a box, like I get it. Like shove it down into the box so you don't have to deal with it. Like I understand why people do what they do. And nobody wants to live through that, especially like if you talk to anybody who's in the medical system about like the way that they handle rapes and sexual assaults and things like that, like it is literally re-traumatizing so many times because they want you to retell a story. They literally have to swab into your vagina to make sure, and like you were just violated there, and now I have to turn around and I have to have all these strangers look at the parts of me that I've never wanted somebody to see before, other than like an intimate partner who I have consented to being in that situation with. But now, because somebody stole my autonomy, I now have to share it with 20 other people. And regardless if they're women or men, like that's traumatizing. Like nobody wants to go through the trauma that they just went through. Like it's like watching a loved one die and then people being like, oh, like, are you sure that this is the loved one that died? As they're like watching you or making you watch the video over and over again. Like those are the pieces that we don't talk about when we talk about like rape survivors and things like that. And people are like, well, why didn't you file a report? Because it's literally traumatizing to file a report. Like, you were just traumatized. Here, let's put it on a loop so that you can watch it over and over again or experience it over and over again. And like PTSD literally is the re-experience of that. And that comes from rape. That comes from like having those things taken away from you. And it's just disgusting at like the very bare minimum of what I like can say about it. And I am lucky enough to have not been one of those people, but I cannot fathom what it feels like.
So that was a really good analogy. And something that's crazy too is that I saw TikTok the other day. I also am on there a lot. Women have more memories of being assaulted or harassed at younger ages. So like 10 to 20, or not even like preteen age, where they walk down the street and get catcalled. And then they're like, well, as I grew up, it didn't happen as much. And I don't know if people fetishize, I can't say that, geez, younger children or what, but I feel like that's a huge issue in society as well. And as I had mentioned, Bad Baby, the men on OnlyFans, as soon as she turns 18, she signs up for this and she breaks the internet pretty much.
Andrew?
So I feel like everything has been said. I echo everything Carly and Cassie just said. Going off and like, in addition to like not reporting right away, as Carly touched on, age, being so young, you might not have the words, the understanding, the safety to be able to tell somebody who would be aware and conscious of what happened to them is a trauma, is illegal. They feel violated, they feel these feelings, but they might not even have the words to describe those feelings. In, you know, the roles that we previously had, growing up, I mean, myself, my family had, you know, like the pet names for like your physical genitalia, like most families did. I to this day will be championing, using physically appropriate names for your body parts, even for small children, because it's necessary with the rampant level of abuse of children, sexual abuse particularly, and just but even if you're not young, you can be older, you can be an adult, but still not have had maybe the experience, or you were able to avoid a lot of those situations somehow, which is great. But then a situation comes along, doesn't feel right, but you don't know that it's necessarily crossing major boundaries. And then you just kind of don't think about it until you, sometimes you just mention something flippantly of like, oh, haha, this happened, this person's a POS, but this is what happened. And then your friends or whoever is looking at you like, oh my God, like, are you okay? That was not okay. That was XYZ, putting words to it. And that might not come for years. That might never come because somebody doesn't want to talk about it. So yeah, I distinctly remember, I think it was the actress from West Side Story. I'm forgetting her name right now, but she came out and said she was either sexually assaulted or sexually harassed during her time as a young actress. And she's now, I believe, in her 80s or 90s. And I was at my grandmother's house when I think she was on 60 Minutes and doing an interview. And that's when she mentioned it. And my uncle immediately out of his mouth was like, why would she say that now? Like, the person she accused, I believe, I don't know if she named names, but I think she did mention that the person was deceased. And I went through the whole spiel with him of like, this was how many decades ago? Now I could report a sexual assault and I have very little confidence in, going through all of that re-traumatization for the perpetrator to actually get put behind bars. And even if they do get put behind bars, the sentence is basically a slap on the wrist. Let's be really honest. So like, imagine decades before. So like going through that whole thing and really just having that deep level of conversation, I think I got through to him, which was a nice feeling. But some people just kind of refuse and put up that mental block of like, so what? Like something bad happens to you, you have to tell the police. And they won't put on your shoes or their shoes to kind of really think about it in depth. How would that make you feel? How all of the things in the history, like the historical re-traumatization, lack of follow through. I mean, I believe the United States is still behind on testing rape kits, several years behind on testing rape kits. So perfect example, you get prodded, you get swabbed everywhere. And 10 years, 20 years down the line, they still haven't tested your rape kit. Like, yeah. So yeah, this is also another topic that could have a whole other podcast that would last quite a long time if we decided to do one on it.
True, because we are actually at the 2-hour and 12-minute mark right now. So that could be for a different day down the road. I guess just in closing with that stuff, obviously the answer would be, okay, no one rape anyone, but we're all at a point in our age where we know that is not going to happen. People are going to get raped, and it's the unfortunate.
People are going to rape.
Yeah, people are going to rape. People are going to rape. People are going to get raped. I guess what things can people do, especially as women, like what things can like guys do to help? Like what things can people do to like it's not impossible to stop, but like try and stop?
So I actually want to highlight something that I think maybe Andrea, you were trying to kind of like emphasize, is that one of the big things I think is how we talk about it. Like, how do we use the language around it? How do we like have that conversation? Is that like we're always going to have that conversation, or we have always routinely had the conversation that, oh, well, she got raped. She got sexually assaulted. Nobody says, oh, well, he raped her. He sexually assaulted her. She sexually assaulted this other person. She raped this man. Like, that's the thing is with the, like, it's so interesting. Like, and I honestly sometimes wish I was like a linguist, but like language is so important in these situations, in the like, just like flipping the script and saying, okay, like somebody being raped is not the same as somebody raping somebody. And I think that that's one of those things that like, as a culture, we've always taken it as, oh, well, like that happened to that person, but we don't approach it from it's that
Somebody
passive
did it
versus
to
active
them.
voice. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I mean, like we all have a tendency to write in that passive voice versus that active voice. And it's just like, it's that bare minimum kind of like language that we have been trained to do our entire lives. And it's so hard because I will say like, oh, well, she got raped or she was sexually assaulted. And one of the things that I've seen, at least in a lot of the movements around this, is like, no, like we don't need to highlight how that person, I mean, we do definitely need to care for it, but like dragging that person's name through the streets because of something that happened to them is a lot different than dragging somebody's name through the streets because they chose to do something. And that's the thing is like when we always bring up the victim of that or the survivor, there's a lot of different, like their language matters again. It takes away from the responsibility of the rapist. Or the person who sexually assaulted somebody. It's so small but so powerful to really like highlight, okay, well, it doesn't have anything to do with how she's dressed. It doesn't have anything to do with like the way that she presented herself. If she said no, damn it, she said no. Like, that is your bottom line. The word no is your bottom line. It is not she dressed provocatively. It's not that she was flirty. It wasn't the this, that, whatever. It wasn't that he was flirty or provocative. And I need to get better at that too, is making sure that I like switch those verbiages, or not verbiages, the pronouns. Yeah. But like it's the fact that rape is never something that's passive. Rape is a choice that somebody has made to do to somebody else. And I think that having us switch that language just even a little bit at a time is going to make a huge difference, because having somebody recognize that it is their choice to make that behavior versus, oh, well, like this just happened to somebody, like those are very different things.
Mm-hmm. And by extension, I feel like with making it in that passive voice, making it that this happened to somebody else, it gets switched or spread over to the perpetrator of like, this is something that also happened to them, even though they are the ones that made the choice to make it happen. But because of the verbiage that is used, yes, that level of kind of passivity gets pushed onto the person that did not have a passive role in the interaction. If an interaction is used very flippantly in that sense.
It's the same verbiage that it's the same situation that goes with like school shooters. Because we say like 15 kids were killed out of school instead of saying a person went in there and killed. It's so same situation verbiage wise. So then back to the thing, what can we do to like help in those situations? Or like from a guy's perspective, what can like guys do to like I don't know, make women feel more safe, like in those type of things? What would be some suggestions?
So going off language, like, yes, if she says no, like obviously point blank. The other thing is recognizing that there is a group of women. I would fall in this category as a people pleaser, that somebody just like has a hard time enforcing boundaries bluntly or blatantly. So also being like, shrugging off like, oh, I don't know. Maybe not right now, like kind of giving the wishy-washy. If your partner is wishy-washy, because I will say guys can be, not be blunt about their boundaries and things like that as well. But having, being cognizant of like, okay, if they're not fully enthusiastic and committed to it, if they're kind of, the verbiage that they're using is not committal, it's also a no.
If it's not a hell yes, it's a no.
Yes. So recognizing that, being willing to take that as not an assault on their masculinity, their attractiveness, or a woman's potential desire to continue to be with them. Because it seems to be, and on the flip side too, that men can say no, men cannot be in the mood. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that something's wrong with you, that they don't like you. Like, it's not a personal attack if somebody does not want to have sex with you. It's not. I know it can feel that way, particularly if, there are self-esteem, ego issues, all that stuff. But like really kind of grasping the idea that if somebody does not want to have sex with you, that doesn't make you less of a person. And it doesn't mean that they hate you or whatever. I think the other thing is just in general, kind of having conversations very early about consent for children across the board. I know for me personally, in my family, probably if I ever have kids, the whole notion of, oh, give me a hug before I go. If my kid doesn't want to give you a hug, I'm not going to force them to give you a hug. Like, and that's going to ruffle some feathers. I know I've seen conversations on it on social media on both sides, but I think it's very important to establish, like, you have these boundaries, things make you uncomfortable, you talk about them, and you are willing to state your boundaries and hopefully not fall into the same level of people pleasing. Well, this is my boundary, but I don't want to make them feel bad, so I'm going to do it anyway. Because it's a sucky place to be and a sucky thing to unlearn. Yeah. Y'all can add other things now.
Carly, do you want to add anything else before we close?
I was going to say, Andrea wrapped that up perfectly. And I like how she mentioned the ego thing. I think that maybe comes down to a little bit of a mental health crisis that we have going down in the United States. We definitely need more mental health care. And also, my daughter's kind of going through that stage right now where she doesn't want to give goodbye hugs. So I'm like, if you don't want to, you don't have to. It's honestly funny that you mentioned that, because like even her grandparents are like, come give me a hug. I don't know, she's been weird about it, but if she don't want to, she don't have to. So yeah, I don't know. I think Andrea did perfect right there.
Okay.
I
Go ahead.
Martin's gonna just lose it on me at some point, I'm sure. I just want to echo everything that Andrea and Carly both said. Like, it's really not like, it's not a reflection on you. Like, my body autonomy has nothing to do with you. But the other part is like, keep your friends accountable. Like, for the love of God, call them out on their shit. Like, if somebody didn't want to have sex with you, you don't need to give them a hard time, because that just perpetuates that cycle of, oh, well, it's attached to my ego. But the other part is like, if somebody says no, like, you as a friend and as like somebody who cares about them, like, you know that people deserve body autonomy. But the other thing is like, also reinforcing the fact that when somebody says no, it means no. Also kind of keep your friend from getting into some hot water potentially. And I think that that's such a big piece that like we're so scared to police our friends sometimes, right? Because we're all about like wanting to be socially accepted, and I totally understand that. I am a people pleaser myself. And it's hard. Like it's okay for people to have boundaries. Those boundaries do not reflect upon other people. They reflect on what keeps you safe and what keeps you okay. So I think that that's kind of like my biggest thing for anybody, like men or women. Like, don't give people shit when somebody turns you down for sex, and like help people understand that like no just fucking means no.
Yes, definitely hold your friends accountable. I feel like I know a lot of shitty people, unfortunately.
Anything else? Anyone?
No, I think that's it. I mean, really, just even going beyond sexual assault, just even the kind of policing, gender-based jokes, things that are just straight up misogynistic, just kind of making, just, if you as like Martin, I'll just say you in particular, just to make it like tangible, like if you as my friend are in a group where it's just all guys and they're talking about women in a way that if I was there, I would probably feel uncomfortable, it's worth calling out. And at least and something else that I've seen on the internet recently, which I appreciate more, because again, I'm not so blunt, I'm not so bold-faced. Because sometimes I will state like, hey, like that's not okay. But then as soon as somebody challenges me on it, unfortunately, my reaction is like, oh shoot, okay, like I made somebody upset, like panic mode sets in, and I can't fully like explain why it's not okay in a sound state of mind. Unfortunately, that's how I'm wired currently. We're working through it, but being able to be like, the joke is told, it's misogynistic, it's racist, it's homophobic, whatever. Being the person that doesn't laugh and be like, why is that funny? Like essentially kind of playing dumb to kind of make them reflect and realize what they said is like, actually, like, yeah, that's pretty messed up. And if they don't realize it's messed up, then that's a whole nother realm of issues.
I'd say I feel like I would throw up if I had to sit through some locker room talk. Like, yeah. For real, I'd be extremely uncomfortable. And yeah, no bueno.
I just I want to add like a quick little plug because I identify as cisgender, so like I identify as a white female. I was born female. I think that one of the other big things is to keep in mind that like Carly and Andrea, I don't know, and even Martin, I'm not gonna like assume what you identify as. But I think that part of this is like really taking into consideration like what non-binary folk, trans folk all kind of like experience this world, because like that's another added layer that just really like we're still learning about. And like I mean it's one of those things where like people are just now kind of like fully at least at a higher rate comfortable having that conversation that they identify differently than what they were born from like their sex. But having that like thought process of, okay, well, like I don't ever know somebody's actual like lived experience, and being really mindful of that, which I mean, I unfortunately didn't bring up soon enough, but I think that's definitely something to kind of like keep in mind as we advocate for women and men and everybody in between.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I also thought about it earlier, kind of talking about the privileges attached, kind of because there, I don't want to call it a division, but there is discussions about white versus feminism for people of color, because white feminists historically have been exclusionary, have ignored the intersectionality that comes along with being in more than one minority group, or being within the majority ethnic group, but a gender minority. Like all of the intersectionality historically has not been honored as well as it should have been. And unfortunately, this forum, none of us on this forum are women of color. I am Hispanic, however, I have the privilege of being white passing. So I don't want to be on here and specifically say that I'm a woman of color, because like most people look at me at this point, they ain't gonna see it. I don't speak Spanish, so like while that doesn't negate my culture and my blood, but at the same time, my experience versus my cousin's experience versus my other cousins who are Afro Latinas, like it's all different. And as much as like by default, I feel like a lot of us are still, like you said, learning the language, learning the roles. And so I know I've caught myself, I have a friend who is a non-binary, and I love them, support them dearly, but switching those pronouns to they, them, making sure like using common phrases, like I couldn't really use like yas queen. Like I looked up different ways of expressing the same thing that's gender neutral. And so it's just kind of going the extra mile just to be respectful. But it is, difficult, and it can be easy to fall back on typical patterns to use, like when, like you mentioned with sexual assault, making sure you say women and men, and non-binary, including all people. It's just our default has been set to primarily say women. But I think all of us are trying to be better at that. And it's just, we need to continue to be better, essentially. Yeah. And thank you for bringing it up.
Anything else?
We could always talk about boxes, Martin.
No, we're fine. I mean, I could continue this going longer, but obviously for editing purposes, that'd be way too much, because then when you look into the rape thing of like the crying wolf thing or stuff like that, or how depending on the race, because historically, I mean, there are more false rapes allegations that are proven true against minority men than and all that stuff. So then when a minority man, when someone hears that someone raped, they don't believe it. Like that's a whole other thing for another day. But I do think that you guys did wonderfully well. So I will just do the normal thank you everyone for listening thing. Make sure you like, rate, comment, subscribe, and then each of you will get your final say, and then whoever's last, that's where the podcast ends. So who wants to go first? Final thoughts.
I'll start because I have a little quiz to go finish.
Oh, fair enough.
Well, ladies and Martin, it was excellent talking to you. I really liked your ideas and what you threw at me. I was like, it took me a minute to warm up. I wasn't super prepared for this. And then I started bouncing off what I heard, and you guys are super mature. Excellent points. I loved hearing everything. Thank you, Martin, for having me on. We got to set up some more podcasts here. I know I wanted to talk about Resident Evil with you.
Just send me a time and date, and we'll see what goes on the calendar.
Good. But yes, you guys were all excellent, and I would love to do more podcasts with all of you here. So
perfect.
Thank you, guys.
So I guess we'll just go age-wise then. Andrea?
Oh, I didn't want to be last. Sorry, Cassie. Carly, absolutely. I enjoyed my time speaking with you guys. And like I said, this is my first time, I think, talking to you again since we met for the first time almost a year ago. Really enjoyed getting to talk to you again. I enjoy these open forum podcasts that we do. I know we always go a little bit longer than we intend, but I think it's because we really get into some deep topics and we really try to dig deep, but without necessarily like going down every single rabbit hole. And I appreciate it. I was nervous coming into this one because I also didn't like fully prepare. Again, my only things I came in here with were my boxes of the Madonna versus the Whore. And I'm glad we got to touch on those boxes. But I really appreciate the level of comfort that it seems like we were able to create with each other. And I appreciate y'all making me feel comfortable. And as much as these are hard topics, it's really, really great to be able to have a safe place to talk about it. Even some people might say it's safer to talk about things with people who are more like-minded. And it seems like in this forum, we have all been within the same frame of mind. But I do think if I were to come with a opposing opinion, I wouldn't necessarily be attacked. And so that's why I like really harp on like, thank you all for being understanding, empathetic, caring, and helping to create this safe space. Because it only really takes one to make somebody feel unsafe and unwilling to share. Yeah, so thank y'all. I do hope, like Carly said, we do more of these.
Kassie?
I just really enjoy talking about boxes. That's the reason I came. I'm just kidding. So yeah, I mean, in all honesty, I love doing these things, especially when we have that more open forum. And like Carly and Andrea both like brought up wonderful like things that I truthfully don't get to talk about, and I enjoy being able to like have these conversations. I'm always so thankful to have a space, and I thank you, Martin, for inviting us to do these types of things, because I mean, life is busy, and unless we slow down and like have these conversations, I think that it's really hard to be able to do this. But I think the other thing that I just want to close out with is like, there's a lot of things that suck about being a woman, but truthfully, like, it's also pretty freaking awesome to be a woman. And I am so thankful to be a woman in the time period that we are right now. Just because, like, I mean, like we talked about before, like not too long ago, we weren't allowed to own land. We weren't allowed to have these jobs that we have. We weren't allowed to do lots of different things. And that boggles my mind, especially somebody who is literally buying a house at the end of this month and also starting a new business. I'm doing all the things, like I am doing so many things that traditionally, like my ancestors have had to rely on, like men allowing them to do. And at the end of this, like, truthfully, like, it's so amazing. And I think that we look back on like ancestors and things like that, and we don't always give them enough credit for like where they've gotten us. especially when it feels like some of the pictures are a little antiquated, like compared to like where we're at now. But the reality is like they did a whole lot of work to get us to where we're at. And I hope that when we look forward in like 30, 40 years, that my hopefully like grandchildren and great grandchildren look back at me and they're like, man, she was a curmudgeon and like didn't like had all these like super conservative views, because that means that we made progress forward. And I think that like, man, like at the end of the day, I think that like we're doing an amazing job at pushing the world forward. Even if it's not always as fast as we would like it to be. So, yeah.
With that being said, this is the L7C podcast signing out. Thank you for listening to this episode of the L7C podcast. Be sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe to the channel. Follow us on all social media platforms, and we'll be talking to you guys soon. Take care.